20. We concluded Moses' conversation with the Lord, the angel of the Lord manifested in the flaming bush. And God has presented his plan to Moses and told him, you are going to go and be my mouthpiece. And during the encounter, Moses brings up some objections. In verse 1 of chapter 4, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, well, I'll stop right there. They'll say, the Lord did not appear to me. And the Lord then proceeds to give Moses 3 signs. He gives him 2 right off the bat. He says, throw down your staff. It turns into a serpent. Moses reaches out, grabs the serpent by the tail. It then becomes a staff again. Moses is then told to take his perfectly healthy hand, put it inside his cloak, and when he removes it, it is leprous and white as snow. It has a terrible disease. It could be a skin disease. It could be cancer, but they just use the term leprosy here. And then Moses puts his hand back into his cloak, removes it again, and is healthy. And we talked about 2 things that God is teaching Moses through this. One, that he is over all of nature. He is powerful. He will protect him from his enemies. He has the power to heal, the power to make sick. And also we talked about this concept that Moses raised up the enemy, or God raised up the enemy that Moses would have to face, Pharaoh, just as he turned that staff into a snake. And in the most illogical to human mind way, he is going to redeem his people in the same way that Moses is reaching for the tail of this dangerous serpent. Just again, safety notice. You're going to pick up a snake. I don't know why you would do that, but you're going to pick up a snake. Don't grab it by the tail. Grab it by the head. But God says to Moses, you're going to grab this thing by the tail. Yes.
Are you calling on me?
Oh, I thought you raised your hand.
I did. So I wasn't here last week, but I just have a couple of things that I'd like to say. It kind of sounds like, although it can't be this, but it kind of sounds like God is going, I don't know if they're going to believe either. Let's try this one, if that one doesn't work. And so I think it's important to say that you can learn the lesson in advance and get all the way to the end of all the crazy things that Pharaoh's going to face. And the lesson is, think about Jesus. His life on earth, his ministry, for 3 years, he did the most extraordinary miraculous things. And what happened at the end? They didn't believe.
Yeah.
They did not believe is because they were incapable of believing without the gift of faith. And that carries into the past as well. Moses is given some information from God and given faith to believe, because Moses doesn't run off and say, I'm not doing this. But he does have a problem with his tongue. There's so much here. There's so much amazing godliness poured out from God. I mean, if you saw somebody's skin restored like that, from leprosy to nice, back and forth, it looks like something, a power trick. But it isn't. It really happened. It's just so much to see here that can't be seen without the gift of faith. Just wanted to say that. That makes the whole thing a little easier to gulp up by the time we get to the end of Pharaoh.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing. I mean, I know that God is outside of time and he sees everything and he knows everything. But he does lower himself
Mm.
to come to us in our form
Absolutely.
and interact with us and teach us. And I don't see it so much as they didn't get it till they got the faith, and then all of a sudden they got it. I see it as a learning process, especially for Moses. He's one of the greatest men. His name is mentioned in scripture more than anybody except David and Jesus.
Mm.
And he's probably no different than we are. But when we come to the Lord, we're able to look back and say, yeah, this, were all little means that God used to bring me, even when I was rebellious.
Mm.
And so I don't disagree with your brother. God is sovereign, and we do come to a point where we see, and then we're able to generally behave differently, but we often do regress and still fall short, even when we have been given faith. It's a journey. Everybody's on a journey. And in my own case, just as quick testimony, I went forward in this room in an evangelistic meeting, and I knew in my head the concept of why I was doing it very well.
Mm.
And to some extent, I meant it, but I hadn't, at that point, I had the maturity to understand everything that was involved in giving your life to Jesus.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I was 29, actually, that the Lord worked in my life through a lot of circumstances. And I finally got down on my knees in my own house because the Lord showed me that he loved me.
Mm.
And without that, and I was able to give my life to him and say, whatever, I'm on campus, if I'm a fool, that's okay. I'm there to serve you and I want to do it. Did that mean I was perfect after that? No, there's some notable mistakes that I made after that in terms of my walk with the Lord. But every one of them produced learning.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of I'd like to think about Moses as a lot like us in the sense that, wow, so much we can't imagine what it would be like growing up in a court of the greatest power in the world at that time. And all the technology they had. They had math and all kinds of stuff to do the kind of things they were doing. And he probably had to learn on that.
Mm.
And that probably was a great resource. And it probably helped him. I think we have to give Moses a lot of credit for the Hebrew language,
Mm.
in spite of what our great scholars are telling us. But anyway, because they don't know, they've got to see the evidence. They've got to see the piece of scrap of whatever it is with some writing on it before they believe it exists.
Yeah.
And that's incredible that someone would say that. Because, well, sorry.
No, it's and I can relate to your personal testimony. Mine is very similar in that, at a young age, I made a profession of faith, and I walked the walk, I talked the talk, and it was more of on an intellectual level. I was talking to Aaron about this the other day. It was more of like I had a worldview, and I believed. But then when I got to be about 18, some life circumstances that I thought were just absolutely tragic and terrible. And, looking at him now as a 45-year-old man, I'm like, kid, pull yourself up. It's not that bad. But, it was that bad when I was 18 to me. I remember throwing myself, it's the same kind of thing. I was in my little apartment and I just threw myself on my knees and I said, Lord, I've been fighting you. And I realize that your way is the only way that works in life. And that was when like real change started to happen. And then I feel like from that point on is when I really started to see things, really experientially see things. And I love the fact here, we talked about this a little bit last week, that God didn't just, even though I believe he has the power to, he didn't reach into Moses' brain and go, boom, you got it. And we will see, he's taking Moses on a journey here of growth and faith. And on the same plane, we see him, kind of an opposite example, say, harden Pharaoh's heart. Harden his resolve to resist God, which is interesting. It's interesting. Also, we talked about this interaction between Moses and Aaron. Sort of a pre-priesthood establishment of the chain of command and the authority here. We see Moses as the prophet speaking on behalf of God, and Aaron being set up as the priest. Aaron is going to speak. He's going to share the words of the prophet, which are the words of God, with the people. And God will put his words into Moses' mouth, and Moses will put his words into Aaron's mouth. That's the arrangement we come to. It's interesting. I don't know. I don't know any. It's just interesting to see the beginning of that. But I want to pick up today in verse 18. We read this last week, but so Moses has filed his objections. God has answered his objections, and Moses says, I'm going. Okay. I'll do this. So Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive. I don't want to make too much hay out of this. I just find it amusing, also touching, that Moses just received a command from the God of the universe to go to Egypt. And he says, I will do this. Just need to ask my father-in-law for permission. It's just interesting. It's kind of touching. It's very human, I like it. Yes. Yeah. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. I don't know if you guys remember when it's very different than when Jacob departed from Esau. When Israel, left the house of his father, he did not go in peace. I don't know what, it just made me think of that, but it's an interesting contrast. And yes.
What happened? When Moses went, was there something there, I wonder, that Moses had to learn? I think so.
And then the Lord said to Moses in Midian. Well, I do think there's a little bit of significance in what Jethro says, and I think it sets up the next verse. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. From his human mind, he says, go in peace. It's a stock, phrase, but he is. The Lord said to Moses, go back to Egypt, for all the men who are seeking your life are dead. So to a certain extent, there will be peace. God has paved the way. So Moses took his wife and his sons, remember he had 2 sons, and had them ride on a donkey and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the staff of God in his hand. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I have put in your power. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. And I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son. Wow. So what is Moses instructed to do before Pharaoh, and what is he instructed to say before Pharaoh? Come on, it's right there. It's easy. What was he instructed to say?
You're supposed to go show the wonders and signs of Egypt and keep them given.
Right. So if you remember, Moses was shown 2 signs and told of a third. We didn't talk about the third this morning yet. Remember what the third was? Turn water into blood, but not just any water. Water from where? The Nile. The economic, the spiritual, the physical heart of Egypt. The lifeline of Egypt. The basis of Egypt's power in the region. The Nile. Again, file that away. That'll become. We'll want to draw on that later. And what is he told to ask of Pharaoh?
Not the firstborn, is that what you're getting at?
Well, yeah, yep. Well, he says he's told to ask of Pharaoh, let my son go, that he may serve me. And then who is identified? Who does God identify as his firstborn son? All of Israel. So he's getting us thinking on this. The text is getting us thinking on this idea that the chosen people, the people that God has set apart, are his. He views them as his firstborn son. And firstborn son, is, as we know, has all the rights promised to him of inheritance, the rights of the father. He has a firstborn son, has preeminence, has security, has all the resources promised to him. And so he's identifying the people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham here through Israel, as his firstborn son. He says, let my son go, that he may serve me. Do you think that this phrase would be offensive to Pharaoh? How could this be offensive to Pharaoh? Think of his reaction. This guy this fugitive comes wandering out of the desert and says, my God says that this people is my son. What do you think Pharaoh's response would be?
Well, it's kind of difficult to not be offended if your heart has been hardened by God's discovery. I mean, anything that smells a little bit of God, it's going to bring offense.
Do you think he's going to be happy with the idea that the people of Israel are not his, but they're God's?
Not only that, they're not going to serve him, but they're going to serve God.
What are you talking about? These are my people, and they serve me. And who are you?
And what you mentioned too, that this is the firstborn.
Yeah,
He doesn't know who God is yet. So he's going to learn a lot more about God,
he is.
about Jehovah. But right now, this is a slave people.
Yeah.
To him, this is nonsense, probably, but he's going to find out who the Lord is.
And we already know from Exodus, the first chapter, and we know from Genesis that let me put it, there's a lot of things about modern thinking in the world that we live in that I don't like. But one thing I would say that society has given us, it falls apart, I think, in our society when we talk about the unborn and we talk about the terminally ill and the elderly. But one thing I would say that modern society has given us is this concept that all humans have value, that we're all human, whether you're from my tribe or not. I think that is a wonderful, wonderful development in human thinking. We are talking about a time in history where, with the exception pretty much of those who know God, as evidenced by the Hebrew midwives, they realize that these babies are made in the image of God. They have that passed down to them from Noah, that God says, "You shall not take blood of another because they are made in my image." This is a time and place where the concept that people from another country or another tribe had equality, had the same intrinsic value. I mean, that is just a completely foreign concept. These are not people, these are slaves. They do my work. They're not my tribe, they're not my country. They're not Egyptian. They're disgusting, filthy shepherds and stonemasons. And this guy comes walking in out of the desert and says, they are the firstborn of the one true God. Brother, you've been out in the desert too long. I don't owe you nothing. So, just to get in kind of that ancient mind, also, we know that Moses is a person who's brought up to believe that he is actually a deity in and of himself because he is Pharaoh. And so to be challenged in that way.
Do you think from this verse where it says, if you refuse to let him go, indeed I will kill your son, your firstborn, do you think that means that he said that right up front? Because I think it's confusing. I remember being confused about this so many years. When did he actually, finally use? I mean, I think it is. It sounds like it is.
Do you think Moses said this at this instance?
That's what I'm wondering.
Yes, I believe. Well,
That's really good of God. I mean, God does tend to warn people. I think that. I mean, I love that about God. I mean, he doesn't have to warn people ahead of time, but he usually does because I'm the moron, us and Nineveh and lots of places that.
It seems.
We'll find out as we go.
Yeah, we don't see this phrase in his first encounter with Pharaoh. So just from the text, we have to say that as far as we know, no, that was not said at that moment. Now, whether that is a complete transcript of the interaction between. Right. Right. Now, I do believe it is brought up that this part of God's instruction is reiterated here because of the next verses. And also to cast our mind back to the murder of the babies of Israel. So we have this promise that is reiterated, and then here we're going to get into a passage that is not very clear. Could I get someone to read verses 24 through 26? It's a fun passage.
At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. "Surely you are bridegroom of blood to me," she said. So the Lord let him alone. At that time, she said, "Bridegroom of blood," refers to circumcision.
Isn't that fun? Now, I have to point some things out to you. Translation has let us down here. This passage is even more obscure than it's written here in the original. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. That is how it is written in the original. It doesn't identify Moses. Moses is never identified in these verses. Then Zipporah took off a flint, cut off her son's foreskin. It doesn't say which son. And it doesn't say who she touched. Moses or the person she did surgery on. And then the phrase, bridegroom of blood, is confusing.
Well, I have a could it be.
What's that?
I have a could it be answer.
Go for it. Because I have some could it be's for you, but go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so we'll start with the possibilities. Okay? The possibility, which is the majority position, is that the person that God sought to put to death was Moses. It could also be one of Moses' sons. Older or younger, we're not told. And then the person that Zipporah touched with the amputated body part, again, could be Moses or could be one of the sons, the sick person. We don't know. We don't know. Also, the phrase bridegroom of blood. What that's actually translated is you are now a relation of a marriage covenant. So it could mean you are my mother-in-law, you are my father-in-law, you are my brother-in-law, you are my sister-in-law. The original translators just wrote bridegroom because they assumed that she was speaking to Moses. Yes.
I just want to get clear what the original said compared to what my American Standard
Okay.
says.
So the original would say this. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death.
So far, so good.
Okay. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched his feet with it and said, surely you are a relationship of a marriage covenant to me.
Okay, so Moses is added, basically.
He is. Yep. Moses is added, and bridegroom is an assumption based on the fact.
We don't know Hebrew, so.
What is 26?
So he let him alone. It was then that she said, a relationship of a marriage covenant of blood because of the circumcision.
Said that twice.
Right. So here, let me flesh out some possibilities and then explain to you why it doesn't matter and what the significance of this is. So here's some possibilities. God sought to kill Moses because his sons were not circumcised. We go to Genesis 17, we can see that this was a huge deal. This is how God was marking out his people. It was a promise made to Abraham. This predates the giving of the law and everything else. The circumcision was what identified the people, the house of Israel. It was a sign of holiness. It was a sign of consecration to God. And so the fact that Moses is about ready to go into Egypt and say, let my people go, and the people of his own house, someone in his own house, has not been consecrated and set aside for God, is an issue. Now, did God seek to put Moses to death? Maybe. Makes sense. Did God seek to put Gershon, his oldest son, to death? That also makes sense based on the previous verses. He says, look, I've made it very clear. If you are not of my people, you are not saved. You face my wrath. So whether it's Moses or Gershon, it makes sense. Something needs to be sorted in Moses' house.
That's good. That says something to Jewish people that will ring true
Exactly.
further down the line as well. I mean, we have to remember that in the temple, wherever the scrolls were brought forth, they're going over this stuff. No? And there's a lot of stuff, I think, I may be wrong, but I think a lot of stuff was put into the minds and the hearts of people, Jewish people, as they moved through time, to be almost a knee-jerk reaction when they heard it. It's like, oh, that's back there. You know, blood, circumcision, all of this stuff. And a bridegroom, what's that about? Well, we hear something later on, the most important part of history is in the future, which is the cross. And there's some things around that where a lot of the priests and the Jewish people who just neglected their duty, all of a sudden remembered some things they were taught. That's kind of rambling.
No, I'm glad you brought that up,
Okay.
because so whether it's Moses or one of his sons, it doesn't matter, but it has great significance. Now, this bridegroom of blood, if it is a bridegroom, that makes sense, because, and then Zipporah is saying, not only are we married, but now, if she's talking to her son, or if she's talking to Moses, it makes a little bit more sense if she's talking to her son. She's saying, now we are related in the covenant as well, in the blood covenant. I'm married into this family, but now we are all marked out. We are all marked out as the people of God. Another side note, she does not touch his feet. That's not what the text originally says.
So I have a question.
Yes.
I'm going out of where you're going. I'm sorry. We hear in the New Testament that we must, the key is to believe by faith. Now, this isn't appropriate to say this, I don't think, but that will get you into heaven if you believe by faith. I think faith is a gift. I think that's important to understand. So take that and move back here into circumcision. Did all of the people who were circumcised, they were marked out, for sure, but did all of those people become saved? Did they all enter heaven?
No idea.
Well, I do. The scripture actually says no. They didn't. We find that in other parts of the Old Testament as well. Some of the fathers did not enter my rest.
Yeah.
Okay, you remember that?
Yep.
Okay. So there's got to, faith still has to. That's me speaking now. Faith still is an issue back here in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Now go ahead.
Yeah.
And if Zipporah knew what to do, then you got to assume Moses knew what to do, he hadn't done it.
Right.
Where's his that, if that's a sign of faith?
Well, it's a sign that his people that he's going to be leading are marked out to be led, and he's marked out to be of that nation
But
as
what I was
well.
saying is he didn't do the personal act of obedience, making sure that his sons were circumcised. His wife, sounds like she might, I always got the impression, I don't know where I got it, but that she kind of did this
Oh, I see what
out
you're
of
saying, yeah.
necessity, but she didn't do it, his sons were gonna be killed, somebody was gonna be killed by God.
Yeah. And so,
So God was gonna discipline in this situation, and so she took it upon herself, she was not the one that was supposed to do it, I don't think.
yeah, so great point. If you go back to Genesis 17, it's supposed to be done on the 8th day in their infancy. And what's also kind of cool is that science teaches us now that at 8 days, the blood of an infant is fully developed so that it can coagulate and heal. And so it's the earliest you can do surgery on a baby and they heal. But that's another side, and they heal properly. These are adults. And so this is traumatic. We know from earlier in Genesis, like how debilitating this surgery is when you're an adult, because you remember when folks wanted to marry into they tricked them. They had them all get circumcised, and when not a person among them could raise a sword to fight them, they came in and slaughtered them. But we're going to move into the realm of speculation here. So just know that the text does not tell us this. John Calvin, for one, he speculates that the reason that it was not done was Zipporah. It was a foreign idea to her and to Jethro, and so he just speculates that maybe in the idea of just keeping the peace and not having it out with his wife and not making an issue of this, he did not make this an issue. There's no way Moses would not have known about circumcision. That was part of the oral tradition. This is what marked out the people of Israel, handed down hundreds of years. There's no way Moses would not have known. But maybe he thought, out in the wilderness, just going to raise my sheep. We get every indication up until that burning bush that Moses was not heading back to be with his people. And so maybe he just thought this is, and again, this is all speculation. Maybe he just thought this is something I don't have to address. And maybe let's just assume Gershon is the one who's at death's doorstep. Maybe God is working on Zipporah's heart. Also, interestingly, I've seen several commentators across the theological spectrum, from Matthew Henry to E. Dennett here, see a comparison between Moses and Zipporah, between Christ and the church, which is just interesting, and sees Zipporah as a bride for the Messiah, and the bride needs some work.
Well, these are the things that the Jewish people might get.
Yeah.
As time went on, it's like, whoa, there's a Messiah coming. There's a lot of trying to understand Jewish thinking without being a Jew. Is even though we got the word promise, and I think actually Frank mentioned this a year or so ago, that it's very difficult to unravel Hebrew thinking from the scriptures, but still we left this record, so we're going to make something of it.
Then her response to Moses was bridegroom blood. I mean, if he made her do it, I'm not sure, she willingly did it, or why she ended up doing it. It could have been out of anger. The response of your bridegroom with blood.
So that's another concept. Maybe Moses was just negligent in his duties, and Zipporah says, I'm taking matters into my own hand. I'm going to get this sorted. Like, you have dragged your feet on this long enough. And that's another, again, we're in the realm of speculation.
But it says right here in verse 26, so he let him alone. It was then that she said, a bridegroom of blood.
Right.
Because of the circumcision.
Right, because remember the original way that phrase is written, you are now a relationship based on a marriage covenant of blood. So we are now part of the covenant, is what's being said. We are part of the covenant.
But Zipporah it is clear that it is Zipporah.
Yes, that is clear.
That's not part of it.
Right? That she is clearly named in the text. Zipporah. Moses, his name is added by translators.
She threw it at his feet. That's in there too, right?
She did not throw it at his feet.
Okay.
She threw it at his groin. Yeah. So that's just a polite.
She made it touch his feet.
Yeah. She actually, yeah.
Yeah. We're doing pretty good, I think. You can just imagine a small group of Jews arguing over this.
Yeah.
They're throwing dirt up in the air.
Again, I think of my favorite movie, Fiddler on the Roof. They're all sitting around the milk cart debating. But hey, you know what, guys? We're out of time. This is great discussion. I love it.
Probably talking about this with the the elders when he was 12 years old.
I love that thought. Yes.
And it's important,
Yes.
and it does have to do with faith,
Yes.
exactly as Mickey said. At least I agree with him.
Yeah.
I think it's faith all the way through. But there's faith and obedience.
Mm,
And faith without obedience is dead.
right.
So that's, they're connected. You can't get away from it because God is interested in righteousness, which means he cares how people treat each other, as well as how they treat him with worship and respect.
Another point of speculation here is that the text does not tell us that God told anyone why he was seeking to kill this person. But they knew what needed. Zipporah, at least, knew exactly what needed to be done. Like,
More difficult stuff.
yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, guys. Thanks.